Hey, thank you very much for joining us as we launch this exciting new series. I'm Raymond Robertson. For those of you who don't know, I am the director of the Mosbacher Institute for Trade, Economics, and Public Policy at the Bush School of Government and Public Service in College Station, Texas. We're really pleased to have you all join us here today for this first of our three-part series on economic diplomacy. As you all know, global power is not just determined by diplomatic or military might, but also by the capacity to enable and support economic development and growth. And I know most of you are very aware that China has been engaging in very aggressive and expansive strategy to gain influence throughout the world by financing critical infrastructure projects throughout the developing world. This lecture series highlights the tools of economic diplomacy that are an essential part of advancing a free market rule of law model for economic growth and countering China's authoritarian capitalist approach. This three-part series is designed for those interested in developing a practical understanding of the various levers used to support U.S. goals, both at home and abroad, including foreign assistance, trade, and development finance. Tonight's focus, the first of these three, will be on foreign assistance. But before we get started, there's a couple of people I'd like to recognize. We'd like to recognize Secretary Henry Cisneros was joining us here earlier, and I'd like to acknowledge his presence here today. He was the 10th U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, a former mayor of San Antonio, and a graduate of Texas A&M University. I'd also like to recognize Roman Napoli, who's the Director of the Office of Budget and Resource Management at USAID, and he was the 2020 Outstanding Alumnus of the Bush School. We'd like to thank him for joining us. Thank you very much. But now I'd like to invite to the podium Rob Mosbacher, Jr., the 9th President and CEO of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation and the current Chair of the Development Advisory Council for the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, for remarks and an introduction to our evening speaker. Rob. Thank you very much.
Howdy. Delighted to be here. Delighted you all are here, and those of us who are joining us remotely. All of us, and this includes Mark Green and myself, who have worked in the international economic development space, believe with all our hearts that it is a critical and, in fact, an essential part of American foreign policy, that we project the rule of law, market-based approach to economic growth and opportunity, and that we help organize our allies and friends to do likewise, because we're in a very competitive world. So this three-part series that starts with foreign assistance and starts with Mark Green will be followed by one on October 6th, Carla Hills, Ambassador Carla Hills, who was intimately involved in the negotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. My dad, as Secretary of Commerce, was also very much involved in that. And then there's a kind of a closer, November 10th, who I hope you will indulge on development finance, myself. So please stay tuned and please remain engaged in this. So I'm thrilled that Mark Green has agreed to join us tonight. Mark and I have worked together for years. He is currently president and CEO of the Wilson Center, which is a nonpartisan, congressionally chartered policy forum that tackles global issues through independent research and open dialogue with administration, with the Congress, and with a whole host of other interested parties. Prior to joining the Wilson Center, Mark served as executive director of the McCain Institute for International Leadership, which was an action-oriented nonprofit dedicated to advancing character-driven leadership based on security, economic opportunity, freedom, and human dignity. From August 2017 to April 2020, Mark served as the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, and he was known for an approach that he named Journey to Self-Reliance. All of us who have a more kind of fiscally conservative bent are always balancing what's the right amount of assistance that we can provide a country without creating dependency. And Mark was very, very focused on how to help move countries along towards self-reliance. He also managed a budget of 24 billion and had 13,000 employees. So it was a major operation and remains so. He helped transform the agency with a new metrics-based country by country approach model. And he was responsible for USAID's first ever private sector engagement policy. In addition to the program reforms, Mark led the agency through a reorganization of its structure and its global presence to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Prior to USAID, he served as president of IRI, International Republican Institute. That's a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing democracy and human liberty around the world. He also served as president and CEO of an organization called the Initiative for Global Development, which I have to chair at the time he was president and CEO. That was a nonprofit organization that was made up primarily of businesses that were interested in relating and connecting with African businesses to help drive economic development and opportunity. He served as the U.S. ambassador to Tanzania from mid-2007 to early 2009, where he led a mission of more than 350 Americans and Tanzanians. And from all reports we got, and this was during the second term of the Bush 43 administration, did a great job and thoroughly enjoyed it, but did a great job as well. Before that, he served 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the 8th District of Wisconsin, and ably represented. And then while he was in Congress, he helped craft some key policy initiatives, including the Millennium Challenge Corporation and President George W. Bush's historic making President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which is called PEPFAR. Mark holds a law degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School and a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. So that's
You got it.
Okay.
Very good.
He's got a number of awards, but one in particular I want to mention because it's near and dear to part of me and more importantly, my wife, who happens to be Colombian, is an award that he got from President Ivan Duque in 2021, the president of Colombia. He presented him with the Republic of Colombia's Orden de San Carlos Gran Cruz, which is truly a high honor. So it is with great pleasure and a great deal of gratitude that I introduce my friend, Mark Raymond.
So as you heard, Rob and I have been friends for a long time, and we've been friends despite our radically different faith backgrounds. He's a Houston Texans fan. I grew up in the shadow of Lambeau Field. So no, but it obviously I am honored anytime that I'm following and with Rob Mosbacher. So what I'd like to do tonight is briefly take you on a journey. It's a journey that's taken me 30 plus years to walk, from communities in Africa to the halls of policymaking here in Washington, D.C. And the journey really starts thousands of miles from here and several decades ago. And it begins in a little village school not far from Lake Victoria, just off the road between Kisumu and Kakamega, within spitting distance of the Yala River. Back then, in that little school where I taught, most of our classrooms didn't have electricity. Many of them didn't even have glass on the windows. They just had bars to keep the animals out. In many of our courses, we had only one textbook for every 8, 10 dozen students, which meant that every lesson that you taught had to be written out word for word on the chalkboard. Problem was, we didn't have chalkboards. We just had thick black paint on the wall. My entire village in those days had but one telephone. And it was a wind-up telephone mounted on a wooden box in the school office. And you'd go in there and you'd pick up the receiver and you'd turn the crank and you'd say, "Operator, give me Nairobi 662. And you'd go outside, sit underneath a mango tree, wait about 20 minutes for the call to come through. Now, to be clear, there were schools in Kenya in those days. And of course, today, they were fully equipped. They were well funded. They were named after politicians and famous people. Our little school ran off tuition and sweat equity from the village. And that's really how this story begins. You see, in order to get those fees, every several weeks, the headmaster of my school, wonderful, wonderful man, but the headmaster of our school would have to walk classroom to classroom, and he would read off a list of names of students whose families were behind on school fees. If you read your name, you had to stand up and leave, and you couldn't come back until you could get what they would say would be some small money. And the term was called chasing students. Terrible term. I remember vividly the first time it happened in one of my classrooms. I will never forget it. I was up at that black paint writing out a lesson, and headmaster came in and read off the names, and about 25%, 33% of my students had to get up and leave. What do you do? And so I went back to the walls and continued writing. And what I remember is, as I was doing that, I heard a noise. And so I stole a glance and I saw some of the students sneaking back into the classroom. Now, Edison Middle School in Green Bay, if you'd have told me about kids sneaking into school, I'd have said you're crazy. In my year as a teacher in Western Kenya, in that entire year, not one student ever asked me for money. They might ask for help with books. They might ask for extra lessons. They never asked for money. And that has never left me from those days until this. And it shaped my views on development. It shaped my views on foreign assistance in so many ways. And they're strong views, sometimes startle people in the development community back here in DC or up in Turtle Bay around the United Nations, where I just came from. But the interesting thing is when you travel in the developing world and you lay it out, people nod their head. When I joined USAID, world's largest development agency, bilateral development agency, largest humanitarian agency, I summarized my remarks walking into the 14th Street lobby when they gathered to greet me. And I'm going to read what I had to say in those remarks. I said to everybody gathered there, the purpose of foreign assistance must be ending its need to exist. Every one of our programs needs to look forward to the day when it can end. And around the world, we better measure our work by how far each investment takes us a little bit closer to that day. Each country must lead its own development journey. But where countries and leaders are willing to make the often tough choices and difficult reforms that any country's journey to self-reliance takes, well, then I think we should walk with them along the way. And we can help our willing partners by prioritizing programs that incentivize reform, strengthen in-country capacity, and mobilize domestic resources. And again, remember, USAID is unlike a lot of other agencies in that we also do the humanitarian side of our work. And so I also said, look, in the area of humanitarian assistance, we will stand with people when disaster strikes or crisis emerges, because that's who we are as Americans. And because we believe that the truest sense of compassion comes with helping others to help themselves, as we respond to their immediate needs, we'll also look for ways to build partner resilience against future crises. And I've tried from my first day in the village to today to make those notions come alive. So the late Mario Cuomo of New York City used to say that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. So the challenge was, okay, how do we take those notions and actually make them into a governing program and a structure at USAID? That was the work that we did. How do you go from that village that I started at and create tools for American leadership? So in my opinion, you embrace three broad principles. Number one, you acknowledge that private enterprise is the most powerful force on earth for lifting lives and building communities. And I've seen that everywhere that I've gone. Number two, you recognize the role that government can play, that government must play in fostering the conditions, policies, and capacities that private enterprise needs to optimize their effectiveness and to take on a country's toughest challenges and highest priorities. And number three, young people are eager. They are eager to harness the innovations that private enterprise brings, new technology, and they want to save the world, beginning with their own little corner of it. And I think it's up to us to help give them that chance. Let me take them out of order. Let me spend a few minutes on that second principle, recognizing the role that government can play. The most important aspect of that role, in my opinion, is when you go country by country, is understanding where a country is on its journey to self-reliance and where they've come from. And so at USAID, we developed what I called country roadmaps. And the jargon's not terribly creative or inventive here, journey and roadmaps, but we pulled together 17 independent metrics, not our metrics, third-party metrics that measured where countries are on the elements that we all believe are key to human dignity and the ability to rise. Some of those metrics measured capacity, the capacity of governments to effectively deliver services, the capacity of civil society to be the connective tissue between citizens and their leaders, and the capacity of citizens themselves. So we were looking at the quality of the education system, access to affordable health care, nutrition, particularly prenatal and postnatal nutrition. The capacity is not enough. You have to have it, but we also wanted to measure commitment, political commitment, economic commitment, because none of the investments that a country like the US makes in a partner country, they're not sustainable unless that country and those leaders have their own skin in the game. Each set of those roadmaps, each set of those metrics created coordinates on that journey. And the main reason for it did two things for us. Number one, it was a conversation tool. And we would sit down with our host country counterparts and say, this is what numbers are showing us. What do you see? What are your ideas? And secondly, we used it wherever possible to prioritize the investments. When you lead USAID, a lot of people come to you and talk about what you should invest in. And one of the greatest things I would say is, I would really love to do that, but this is what the numbers are showing me we need to focus on. And also it gave us the ability to turn to our partners and say, look, we don't have all the answers, but this is what we see. Let me return to that third principle, harnessing private enterprise and the innovations that it brings so we can help young people have exciting opportunities and help them maybe, just maybe, save the world. So how do I know that that will work? How do I know that private enterprise and technology will do it? In the time since I left that little village, there have been two quiet revolutions in the developing world that we don't talk about often enough. And the first one's the most obvious one, technology. So I told you about that little wind-up telephone. That was back in the late 1980s in that little village. About a dozen years after I left that village, I went back. I was a member of Congress. I was a one-man election observation team that Henry Hyde sent out. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody I was coming for security reasons. So I go to the village and I'm walking along the mud path and I see a young boy and I call him over. And I said, do you know Neva, one of my former students? He said, yes. And I said, can you go get him for me? He said, yes. And he pulled out his cell phone and sent him a text message. Almost blew my mind. Not so long after that visit, I was back in East Africa as ambassador to Tanzania. And my Tanzanian drivers were pulling out their SIM cards and conducting business and doing transactions. I couldn't keep up. Not so very far in time or distance from that old wind-up telephone. There's a second quiet revolution that's taken place, which is no less dramatic and is the one that we don't talk about often enough. So when USAID began all those decades ago, 3 out of every $4 that flowed from America to the developing world came from the government. It was government money, official development assistance, what we call ODA. Today, it's maybe 1 out of $10. Is that because the government is backed down or backed off? It's because private resources have raced ahead. Philanthropy, remittances, but more than anything else, commerce and investment. The IMF tells us that the 10 fastest growing economies in the entire world are all in the developing world. The World Bank tells us that half of Africa is now lower middle income or higher. Now, none of this is news to American business. American business knows, my father-in-law, the corn and soybean farmer, knows that 95% of the world's population lives outside the borders of the United States. Business has actually developed a very specific term for these people. They're called customers. Private dollars are flowing to the developing world like never before. And if we can put this all together, if we can prioritize reform-oriented assistance, guided by outcome-based metrics, aimed at the barriers to private enterprise and innovation, if we harness technology, especially frugal technology, and put it in the hands of a rising young generation, if we make our priority a hand up instead of a handout, our guiding purpose, if we do all of that, there is no telling what can be achieved. So what does that look like? On the government side, it looks like the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the MCC. The MCC doesn't do grants. It does compacts. It's condition-based money. And it's done essentially through a third-party entity. And it's completely transparent. I had the privilege some years ago, and every compact, I should say, lasts precisely 5 years. Some years ago, I went to the termination of a compact in Senegal. In Senegal, they had built this magnificent highway using the MCC. And as you do in development projects, we all went there and we cut the ribbon and so on and so forth. But the interesting thing was, after everybody had left, a young Senegalese lady who had been in that third-party entity that essentially had administered the release of money, she came up to me and she said, you know what the great thing about this is? She says, it's not the highway. We can build highways. It's the fact that because of the MCC, you prove to us you can do it on budget, you can do it transparently, and you can do it on time. And we now have hundreds of people who have hands-on experience in doing that. That's pretty cool. What does it look like in a government program? It looks like the revised collaboration rules that I brought to USAID. So traditionally, private sector and businesses and government are, almost enemies, and they get together with written contracts. What we tried to do is break some of that down and stretch the rules to allow for what I call the collaboration ethic. So traditionally, for the longest time, the development community would tell you that they partner with the private sector all the time. And what they really meant was they would draw up a contract, put all the provisions in, and come to business and say, here, could you do this for us? That's not collaboration. That's not partnership. That's a contract. Contracts are great. We do contracts. But why don't we turn to private business and say, hey, this is what we want to take on. What do you got? What can you do? What does that look like? Remarkable possibilities. It looks like USAID's partnership with Ignitia AB. Ignitia AB is the world's first tropical weather forecasting company. And it works off SMS text messaging technology. Thanks to this technology that was created and funded by USAID, each and every day, 700,000 farmers in Ghana receive by text message a localized weather forecast that helps them decide on when they're going to plant, when they're going to water, and when they're going to harvest. Every 48 hours, they get one. Not so long or far from that wooden box with a crank. Or it looks like USAID's partnership with Syngenta, the agribusiness company. So working with Syngenta, USAID is able to bring the highest quality seeds to African farmers, seeds that can help them build resilience against infestation, against drought, and expand crop yields. Syngenta brings to the table its product, its technology. USAID brings to the table the ability to coordinate with local distribution, access to finance, working with farmers through product demonstrations, and working with the host country government to streamline the approval process to make sure those seeds get out as fast as they can. Public benefit, private enterprise driven results. Let me close with this and take questions. So, I mentioned to you that I started that little village in Kenya. 30 years after I left that village in Kenya, I was able to go back to Africa with USAID. And I went back on my first trip to the Horn of Africa. I went to Ethiopia, the Somali region in Ethiopia, a region which at that time was entering its third consecutive year of drought. Part of the program that we were doing that day that I was there, we were doing with our partners, the World Food Program, Governor David Beasley. And David and I were walking through the food distribution area. And well, what happened is people would come and they would get a sack of grain, they would take it home and divide it up amongst the family. And as I was walking through, an Ethiopian lady, wonderful lady, stopped me. She said, I have a question. I said, sure, great. What is it? She said, first off, thank you for this food. We really need it. So the question I have is, can you help me with irrigation so I never have to ask you again? Right. That's golden.
Right.
That's human nature. It's the drive that people have. And that is the power that's at the heart of, again, what I call the journey to self-reliance. And if we tap into that, if we empower people like that Ethiopian lady, there is no telling what it is we can achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure,
That was
of course.
amazing, Ambassador. I really appreciate it. Please join me up here. So what we're trying to model here for this series is interaction between your comments and the students who are here today. So what I'd like to do is open it up to you, anyone here, and maybe online, if you're on Zoom, that you want to send in a question, to go ahead and start participating in the conversation. We'd love to hear some of your questions. I will ask that when you ask a question, we do have a microphone over there. It's standing right over there on the side of the room. And please just use that because the room is not wired very well for sound. So that'd be great. Is there anyone who'd like to start off with a question? Please.
Ambassador, thank you for joining us. My name is Dustin. I'm an international policy student here. I'm curious as to the metrics you used in terms of the roadmap, and if it was or if it was not aligned with UN development goals, and kind of what that thought process was in terms of what was the goal of the roadmap. Thank you.
Sure. So one of the interesting aspects of Millennium Challenge Corporation is when we created the MCC, we didn't know it was going to last more than 5 years. It was an experiment. But what MCC did is help inspire and influence every other agency in a very positive way. And one of the ways that it did was the focus on metrics. And that's at the heart of MCC. But a lot of the SDGs, not all, but so many of them are like a lot of the MCC indicators, input indicators or output indicators. I was interested in outcomes, looking for ways of analyzing capacities. We identified the 17 through my career staff. One of the things that was very important to me at USAID is that we tried to create career staff driven reforms so that it was sustainable, not political, not partisan, had credibility. And the 17 indicators, again, capacity and commitment, we're trying to measure those areas that our team, our experts were telling us were the key either barriers or indicators of what was holding a country back. And you can get the roadmaps online, you can see them, and we plotted over multiple years where a country is and where it is compared to other countries. And the idea was to look and see how a country was progressing. And as a country rose more, the goal was to enhance the opportunities of private sector partnership. So there are countries that are a long way off from being able to receive, to interest and receive private investment. And so we were looking for ways to identify those key points and then work with the country to begin to transition, not so that the US government walks away, but instead that the relationship changes. So that's the purpose of the metrics. And, I feel very good about the approach that was taken, and it has influenced some other countries and other agencies and what they've done. I think that with the SDGs, obviously COVID has been, and quite frankly, the war on Ukraine have been events that have been disruptors, and I think have caused us all to pause for a moment. The other big, it's influenced by those two as well. The other big development that worries me a great deal that I think in some cases throws off the SDGs is the human displacement crisis. 100 million people displaced around the world, 1 million children born as refugees or displaced in the last 2 years. The average age or the average length of stay for a displaced person is like 16 years, and it keeps going up. And I think that's throwing a lot of things off because it becomes the weak link in development around the world. How do you say that you've been able to wipe out polio if you've got people on the move and quite frankly, you can't get access to services or whatever it might be? So I think that's the other thing that's throwing all these things off, throwing off MCC. And I think USAID, is trying to figure out ways that we traditionally go country by country because you can incentivize. 100 million displaced gets to be a little bit hard. People are not where they were and not where they're going to be. So it's a challenge.
Thank you.
Let me just say on the private enterprise side, though, one of the most uplifting things is you're seeing a lot of young entrepreneurs looking for ways to help people who are displaced. And there are a whole wide range of emerging technologies that are really interesting, that bring greater human dignity to people who are displaced, but also help in an innovative way deliver services. So.
Great. Thank you. Are there any other? Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, it's a long walk. It's a long walk to the microphone. All right.
Thank you so much. This is very timely. I was just in New York yesterday for a tech forum to talk about some of the challenges that are going on and listen to some of the UN's new initiatives regarding developing markets. And one of them had to do with technology education and the skill sets that are available in emerging markets. I'm a consultant for pharmaceutical companies who are looking to move to some of these markets. What kind of recommendations can I provide to them if they want to help invest in the local economy and also help maybe build some of these skills that are needed? What's the best way to go about doing that?
Well, 2 days ago, I was with Henrietta Fore, the former head of UNICEF, on a panel on displacement, and her proposal is to connect every single refugee camp in the world to the internet. She believes that should be a US mission And the power of the US private sector can do that like nobody else. And I think that's a key part to it is how do you deliver educational content? And there are some, Arizona State University is particularly known for that, but there are others. Let me tell you what I think a significant concern is that we all have to be focusing on. So everybody gets it. We need to make sure that people have sufficient access to healthcare in these displaced settings. I'm really worried about the lack of civic connectiveness. So you're born in the camp, you grow up, and God willing, someday the fence comes down, the gate opens up. How are you connected to the world around you? How are you not vulnerable to the worst kinds of exploitative forces? And the second trip I took as administrator was to Burma and Bangladesh. And because my former organization, IRI, along with NDI, had helped Aung San Suu Kyi when she was under house arrest and in exile, I was given special permission, highest ranking US official, to go into the internally displaced camps, which is as dark a thing as I have ever seen anywhere in the world. Rohingya families that were at that time 6 and 7 years inside a prison camp. And, I just worry about how those kids, how are they going to be connected to the communities around them? I would recommend to you the Wilson Quarterly from last fall was dedicated entirely to human displacement. And we were very lucky because we solicited some contributions to help people understand the challenges. President Duque wrote an article. King Abdullah of Jordan wrote an article. In both cases, those two leaders came out and said, look, just to be clear, people are not going home. And we need to understand that. We need to figure out how you take on questions of integration. How do you take on some of these challenges? An area that we're really looking to do, and I think is a wide open opportunity for private enterprise, is we're trying to develop a toolbox of basic services we should be able to agree that every person in a displaced setting should have access to. So that again, you create some connectiveness to the world around them. And in the panel that we did up in New York, we were also at Sesame workshop there because when I was in Burma and Bangladesh, and was Henrietta's wonderful entrepreneurial approach to things. The government of Bangladesh would not allow you to build schools or classrooms for the Rohingya because that would imply they were going to stay. So Henrietta created learning centers. They weren't schools, they were learning centers. You weren't allowed to teach in Bangladeshi because that would also imply that they're going to stay. So we partnered with Sesame to broadcast content. It's not a replacement for a school, but you work with what you can. So I think turning to private enterprise and innovation to try to deliver some of these basic human dignity centered services, I think would be phenomenal, would be a real opportunity.
Great. Is there another question? Shelby? Yes, several of my former students here from the College Station campus who've now been gainfully employed in DC.
Yes, and I actually used to work within DHA, so
Great.
amazing work is being done there. My question for you is how the current localization efforts at USAID can be used to build the kind of self-resiliency or economic self-reliance that you've been talking about.
I have to admit to some concerns.
Mhm.
What I worry about is turning to large contracts. To me, you want to cut out the middlemen and middlewomen and quite frankly, just collaborate directly with local organizations.
Mhm.
So I'm a little bit worried about large scale contracts. It's something that I've never been a big fan of. And I say it as not a criticism or an observation. The administration right now as it looks at the world is facing a lot of fires burning, right? I mean, every corner of the world there's a fire burning and it's difficult and they've got a lot of challenges and it's not easy. There's a great risk out there right now. And I've been saying this for some time. The humanitarian needs are so great. I'm worried that they're going to begin to cannibalize development investments. There's only so much money to go around. And emergency food, emergency water, emergency shelter, they're a moral obligation, but they're not sufficient to the task. The young man who leads our displacement program is a former lost boy from South Sudan. And he talks about what it's like to spend 6 and 7 years in a camp. And, we have to be thinking about how we help these people, again, get access to services, develop their capacity. And as John Thon keeps pointing out, there are marvelous, bright, high character people in these settings, and we're not tapping into them and we're not getting the benefit of their abilities. To me, locally driven solutions. I like to collaborate with local organizations. I think we should work with the community and faith, whatever it takes to reach corners that have been left behind. To me, that's what we need to do. It's hard work. When I was at AID, and we brought about some of these reforms to try to work more in collaboration and to work more in the community-driven approach, I was very open with the team, said, yeah, this is hard. This is much more work, but this is what we do. And everyone said, yeah, this is what we do. We never had a complaint because people who work in this field, whether it's at the USDFC or MCC or USAID, are mission driven. That's their, by definition. To me, I'd keep it as local, community oriented as possible. Like I said, I'm not as big a fan of working with large scale contracts is an absolute necessity in some places. But boy, for me, as much as you can possibly do it, I'd keep it local and small.
Thank you so much.
Is there another question?
Tell you a quick thing I was thinking about, talking about displaced peoples. The final trip that I took overseas with John McCain. John McCain was for the Munich Security Conference, and very typical of John McCain, his office reaches out and said, we're going to stop somewhere on the way. Okay, this is like 72 hours out. So we're going to stop in Serbia. So that's actually not on the way. But we went to Serbia to go visit a refugee processing center. And the thing I remember, we went into the center and you saw families in different places huddled by food and such. But most were huddled in one corner. And I thought, I'm not sure what's going on there. So I walked up and I looked around and they were there because they were charging their cell phones.
Oh,
And I realized that that's how they were staying in touch. That became their passport. That became their economic tool.
right.
It's really interesting.
Professor Gauze.
I appreciate the tension between immediate humanitarian needs and longer term development
hard.
needs. But I think there's also a tension between this essential element you spoke of earlier of state capacity. And not in an exaggerated sense, but just transportation, roads, education, rule of law. I mean, if you're going to have contracts, you have to have rule of law, and that means the law has to extend out to the borders.
Rule of law being as should be as high a priority as almost anything, because it's without the predictable rule of law,
You're not going to have a
get the
private
business
sector.
investment. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So there's a tension though between a local focus and these larger state capacity issues. Could you talk a little bit about that tension and how you think that tension can be managed?
Well, so first off, when it comes to foreign assistance, and this is true back when I was ambassador in Tanzania, I think you have to be very direct with your host country partners as to shortcomings. The money's voluntary. I'm under no obligation to give anybody a dime, right? Between a country that is, doesn't have rule of law, a country that is corrupt, isn't abiding by basic human dignity and how it treats women and how it treats marginalized communities, versus a very poor country which is really trying hard. I know where I'd like to put more of my resources. And I think it's an interesting thing when you work with host country partners. I remember when we put together these roadmaps, and it took us months to do, and we were getting ready to launch them, and we put together a cable asking country by country, hopefully the ambassador, but at least the mission director, to meet as high up the political food chain to sit down and discuss it. And I had a few people from State Department reach out and say, we're absolutely not going to do this. And I said, why? And I said, it's offensive. It's really going to bother them. But, I actually don't think so. I think you're being patronizing, quite frankly. And I actually, David Hale, who's acting undersecretary, who now is with me at the Wilson Center, and I asked him, and he said, go for it. And we didn't have one complaint. I think having frank conversations with host country leaders on all levels about, again, going with some humility, what I always used to say in Tanzania, saying, look, I'm not saying we've got all the answers. I'm saying we've probably made all of the mistakes in our history. Guess what? You can have the benefit of our mistakes and you don't have to repeat them. And I always found that when you went like that, people said, man, we get it, that works. The tension that you speak of, the question comes, how do you foster self-reliance if you aren't investing in the leaders, right? We don't want to be in the business of permanently providing assistance. And I know no country wants us to be permanently in the business of providing them assistance. So I think working closely with leaders, honestly, frank conversations, looking for ways to build capacities, incentivize policies. I think it's the hard work of what we do. I just think that is day in and day out. That's the work of being an ambassador. That's the work of being a development lead. When I was ambassador, the president of Tanzania was a fellow by the name of Jakaya Kikwete, who's a good friend to today. We didn't always agree. I mean, there were times when we did not, but I always found that just an adult conversation, discreet, and nobody's seeking to embarrass anyone or whatever it might be. I think that takes you a long way. And I think good leaders around the world, the ones that you can partner with, they'll be very open to discussions about things that we see. Again, I think you go in with a sense of humility, but the tension of I did democracy work for quite some time. There are times when you need to work almost exclusively through civil society. One of the things that I did at USAID when an election was totally fraudulent, I was under no obligation whatsoever to continue vast amounts of aid to a country where a leader stole an election. What I would rather do than walk away is provide additional resource to civil society and to groups that are delivering services to people on the community level, the local level, oftentimes to journalists, investigative journalists, and look for ways to, in those cases, and maybe that's what you're getting at, in those cases, focus on individual communities. Maybe that's a good way of capturing it.
So I'm going to take a prerogative of being up here with you. I have a question. That's right. So obviously this is the first in our series of lectures on economic diplomacy. And I've heard a lot from you about sort of your vision for how you would engage with other countries. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how these efforts were received and how do the actions of USAID build and advance US economic diplomatic goals? Did you get some experience with that or some best
Sure.
examples,
So,
or-
I'm pretty old fashioned in that I believe that America is a force for good and needs to be a force for good. I think America needs to be engaged in the world. I think America should never shy away from talking about what it stands for. And, I just think that's who we are. I think that economic diplomacy is vitally important, but I think economic diplomacy cannot be devoid of values. The question I often get is about how we compare to China, for example. And I have a very good China expert at the Wilson Center, and he has a habit of coming up to me and saying, tell your colleague not to be China light. Tell your colleagues that this isn't just about moving money. He said, guess what? Authoritarians can always move money faster than democracies. He said, here's your competitive advantage, what you bring, the values that you bring. When I was at AID, we developed a framework we called Clear Choice, which was to talk about the journey to self-reliance. And the way that I think you compete with China in countries around Africa is you sit down and you just be very honest. This is our approach. It's hard. It is hard. It requires reforms. It'll take some time. At the end of it, you will be more self-reliant and you will be a true business partner. With a Chinese investment, if you become more self-reliant, somebody in China is going to get fired because they did their job the wrong way, right? China is the opposite. They want countries to become more dependent. We believe in self-reliance. They believe in subservience in many cases. And again, I think we should never be shy about the bargain that we offer. We should be honest about other models that are out there. We're still the shining city on a hill to most of the world. And I think that there's nothing that should hold us back from talking about that. Again, that also means admitting openly to our shortcomings, our mistakes, the things that we have done wrong, which is a whole bunch of stuff. But I find that when you talk about shortcomings and mistakes and imperfections, I think people admire that and they look and say, wow, they can talk about those things.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Is there another question? Yes, sir.
Thanks for the talk, Ambassador. I am Gyu Sang-shim, Instructional Assistant Professor at DC campus. So many African countries are actually suffer from armed conflicts, right? So I was wondering if USA has some kind of interaction with armed groups or doing something for like preventing, or promoting stability in these regions.
Great questions. So there's some, I'll put it in the context of what we've been talking about when it comes to displacement. We're at a time right now when, as we discussed, there are enormous challenges around the world. Sometimes the outward signs that we see, whether it be conflict or upheaval, we have to recognize that they are not the causing forces, they are the symptoms, or they are the collateral outcomes. So, there is simply no doubt that we are seeing climate extremes in an accelerating way. So we could talk about, for example, conflict in the Sahel, but some of that conflict is caused by disputes over resources and lack of arable land and those challenges. So some of these conflicts are from broad forces that, quite frankly, are hard for us to get our arms around. And I think we're working towards, but nobody has all of the answers. What worries me as an old democracy warrior is that some of these challenges that we're talking about, they're long-term. I served in Congress for 8 years. I used to joke that when you're in the House of Representatives, you're in the only institution when you know when the end of the world is, first Tuesday in November in an even numbered year. Joking. The problem is the way that our political institutions are set up. They are incentivized to make decisions on how it looks good every November in a even numbered year. The problem is a lot of these challenges actually don't lend themselves to that, and it's a real conflict for us. I mean, look at the debate, or not debate. Look at the policy calculations and what we're grappling with on climate extremes. So when you hear the discussion, public discussion of the goal being bending the curve so the temperature only goes up by 1.5 degrees 20 years from now. Now there's a campaign bumper sticker, right? I mean, it's a difficult thing to keep focus on and measure progress along the way. And so I think these are hard challenges that you're pointing to. And some of these protracted conflicts in the programs that I did up in New York, this is what I was talking, I did a program with Queen Rania. You know, Jordan, we were talking about the challenge that our attention is drawn to the latest crisis. Well, we still have Syrian refugees. We still have Venezuelan refugees. And I think we're grappling to get our arms around some of these longer term challenges. And I don't think it's easy. You know, I think President Biden deserves a ton of credit for strengthening and rebuilding some alliances. I think what has been done in the response to in the engagement around Ukraine, I think there are some great accomplishments there. And I think we need to build on our alliances. The only way that we're going to be able to tackle some of these longer term problems is in close coordination with partners, but they're simply not going to be easy. They're going to be really hard. They most definitely are.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Ambassador Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I also especially want to thank all of you that joined us tonight and to our online audience. For those of you who are here, we're going to have a small reception outside, so please join us for that. For those of you who are both here and online, please join us next month for our next exciting installment of the Economic Diplomacy Series, where we'll have Carla Hills, as Rob mentioned. And
then some guy named Rob
That's right,
Muffler.
we'll be third. Thank you all very much. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, my
I
pleasure.
have a special gift for you.
Oh, thank you. No, well, thank you. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good stuff.